Hello students, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ritesh Button and in this video I'm going to explain chapter 6 from your textbook in political science, Contemporary World Politics. The old name of this chapter was International Organizations and the new name is United Nations and its organizations. This chapter starts with the question, why international organizations? Though the international organizations are not the answer of every question, but still we cannot imagine a world without them. The international organizations are extremely necessary with the matters of war and peace, and also they help countries to cooperate to make better living conditions for all of us. In many situations, it is felt that the United Nations was not very effective to solve all the problems of the countries of the world, but still its presence is very, very important. There are two cartoons given on the first page of the chapter and both cartoons comment on the ineffectiveness of the United Nations organizations, usually referred to as the UN. But why do we then need organizations like the UN? Dag Hammarskjöld, the UN's second Secretary General, said that United Nations was not created to take humanity to heaven, but to save it from hell. In the words of Churchill, jaw is better than war, meaning word or conversation or communication is better than war. In the words of Shashi Tharoor, the former UN Secretary General for Communications and Public Information, it's better to have one place where all the countries in the world can get together, bore each other or push each other, sometimes with their words, rather than bore holes into each other on the battlefield. So the conclusion of these lines or the conclusion of these quotes is, international organizations are not the answer to every question or to everything, but they are important. International organizations help with matters of war and peace. They also help countries cooperate to make better living conditions for all of us. Countries have conflicts and differences with each other, but it does not mean that they should go for war to deal with the hostilities. The matters which are controversial or contentious can be discussed and the peaceful solutions can be found. An international organization is not a super state with authority over its members. It's created by and responds to the states. It comes into being when states agree to its creation. Once created, it can help member states to solve their problems peacefully. An international organization can help produce information and ideas about how to cooperate. It can provide mechanisms, rules and bureaucracy to help members have more confidence that costs will be shared properly, the benefits will be fairly divided, and that once a member joins an agreement, it will honor the terms and conditions of the agreement. Now let's move to the next topic, evolution of the UN. Evolution of the UN. After the First World War, the League of Nations was created with the hope that it would help to avoid the war. But despite its initial success, it could not prevent the Second World War. Many more people died and were wounded in this war than ever before. The UN was founded as a successor to the League of Nations. The UN was established in 1945, immediately after the Second World War. The organization was set up through the signing of the United Nations Charter by 51 states. Its creation was intended to achieve what the League of Nations could not achieve between the two world wars. The UN's objective is to prevent international conflict and to facilitate cooperation among states. It was founded with the hope that it would act to stop the conflicts between states escalating into war, and if war broke out, to limit the extent of hostilities. Furthermore, since conflicts often arose from the lack of social and economic development, the UN was intended to bring countries together to improve the prospects of social and economic development all over the world. By 2006, the UN had 192 member states. These include almost all independent states in the UN General Assembly. All members have one vote each. In the UN Security Council, there are 5 permanent members. These are the United States, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, and China. These states were selected as permanent members as they were the most powerful immediately after the Second World War and because they constituted as the victors in the war. The other non-permanent members, which are elected after every 2 years. The most important public figure of the UN is the Secretary General. The present UN Secretary General is Antonio Guterres. He took the office on 1st January 2017. The UN consists of many different structures and agencies. War and peace and differences between member states are discussed in the General Assembly as well as the Security Council. Social and economic issues are dealt with by many agencies, including the World Health Organization, that is WHO, the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, the United Nations Human Rights Commission, UNHRC, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR, the United Nations Children's Fund, that is UNICEF, and the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, that is UNESCO. And now let's move to the next topic, reform of the UN after the Cold War. Reform of the UN after the Cold War. In recent years, there have been demands for reform of the world body, but there is a little clarity and consensus on the nature of reform. 2 basic kinds of reforms face the UN. 1. Reforms of the organization's structures and processes. 2. And a review of the issues that fall within the jurisdiction of the organization. Almost all showed their agreement that the reforms are necessary in both the aspects. But on the issue on which it is difficult to agree is precisely what is to be done, how is to be done, and when is to be done. In the first kind of reform, that is the reform of structures and processes, the biggest discussion is on the functioning of the Security Council. In relation to this issue, there has been a demand for an increase in the UN Security Council permanent and non-permanent membership. On the issue within the jurisdiction of the UN, some countries want the organization to play a greater role in peace and security missions, while some other countries want the role of the UN to be confined to development and humanitarian work. Now the next topic is reform of structures and processes of the UN. A resolution was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1992 over the reforms in the Security Council. The resolution reflected 3 main complaints. To look into the complaints over the restructuring of the UN, on 1st January 1997, the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan initiated an inquiry into how the UN should be reformed. Criteria for inclusion of a new member was discussed, and some of them were that a new member must be a major economic and military power, a substantial contributor to the UN budget, etc. The different governments saw advantages in some criteria and disadvantages in others, depending on their interests and aspirations. A demand to abolish the veto power altogether was also raised. Many perceived the veto to be in conflict with the concept of democracy and sovereign equality in the UN. Permanent members have two privileges, that is, veto power and permanency in the Security Council. Veto power means that if a permanent member casts a veto in a negative manner, then it may stall the decision taken by the other members of the UN Security Council. Without veto power, there is the danger that the great powers would lose interest in the world body, and without their support, the world body would be ineffective. Then the next topic is jurisdiction of the UN. Jurisdiction of the UN. A meeting was held in September 2005 to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the United Nations and to review the situation. The leaders in this meeting discussed some steps that should be taken to make the UN more relevant in the changing context. These steps include establishment of a Human Rights Council, creation of a Democracy Fund, an agreement to wind up the Trusteeship Council, etc. And the next topic is India and the UN reforms. India and the UN reforms. India has always supported the restructuring of the United Nations. It believes that a strengthened and revitalized UN is desirable in a changing world. The most important demand of India is regarding the restructuring of the Security Council. It supports an increase in the number of both permanent and non-permanent members. It also argues that an expanded council with more representatives will enjoy greater support in the world community. India itself wishes to be a permanent member in a restructured UN, and there are several strong reasons for that. A few of them are: India is the world's largest democracy and the second most populous country in the world. India has participated in virtually all the initiatives of the UN. Its role in the UN peacekeeping efforts is a long and substantial one. India's economic emergence on the world stage is another factor that justifies India's claim to be a permanent seat in the Security Council. India has also made regular financial contributions to the UN and never faltered its payments. Despite India's wish to be a permanent veto-holding member of the UN, some countries question its inclusion. They are concerned about Indo-Pak relations, India's nuclear capabilities, etc. And now the next topic is the UN in a unipolar world. The UN in a unipolar world. It is believed by many countries that the reform and restructuring of the UN could help the UN cope better with the unipolar world in which the US was the most powerful country. The US stands as the only superpower after the disintegration of the USSR, hence US power cannot be easily checked or challenged. Within the UN, the influence of the US is considerable. As a single largest contributor to the UN, the US has unmatched financial power. The UN is not therefore a great balance to the US. Nevertheless, in a unipolar world in which the US is dominant, the UN can and has served to bring the US and the rest of the world into discussions over various issues. The UN is an imperfect body, but without it, the world would be worse off. It is really hard to imagine how the entire world would live together without an organization such as the UN. peoples and governments will have to find ways of supporting and using the UN and other international organizations in ways that are consistent with their own interests and the interests of the international community more broadly. This is the end of this video, and I strongly believe that this video is proved to be beneficial to all of you. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you so much for watching.